Hi, I'm Kaziuk. In this video I'll present my thought experiment, which I came up with once in my free time. The result of my thought experiment is an absurd. This absurd, which I have called the Kaziuk paradox, shows that what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity is nonsense. Well, unless the Kaziuk paradox can be solved. If you solve the Kaziuk paradox, you'll receive great prize from me, my charming she-goat Beatrice. Or $1 million. But if you fail, and nobody else succeeds, it'll mean that the Kaziuk paradox is unsolvable. My thought experiment is as follows. Somewhere in space is a space station A with observer A and clock A, and very far from this space station is identical space station B with observer B and clock B. Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that when a body is moving relative to another body, then there is the time dilation. But in my thought experiment, the stations don't move relative to each other yet. That's why in my thought experiment, the time dilation doesn't occur yet. And that's why, both clocks are running at the same pace. Just a small note, in my thought experiment, the clocks have only one hand because it's clearer in this way. The observers are just talking on the radio. First, they synchronize their clocks. It's no problem because observers know what distance separates the stations. Thus, they know how long the radio waves travel this distance. And thus, the observer, who received the message saying where the hand of his clock should be placed at the moment, knows how much time to add so that both clock hands are in the same position. Now, observers agree that they'll throw coal into the station furnaces when the clock hands will be in such position. The agreed time has just come. So observers are throwing coal into the station furnaces. As a result, the stations take off. Now, the stations are accelerating. And because observers threw into the furnaces the same amount of coal, which they agreed during the conversation on the radio, the stations are accelerating the same. Albert Einstein says in General Theory of Relativity that as the speed of a body is increasing more and more, the clock is running slower and slower. But because the stations are accelerating the same, the hand of clock A and the hand of clock B are slowing down the same. Therefore, the hand of clock A is constantly in the same position as the hand of clock B. When observers were talking on the radio, they also agreed that they would put out the furnaces after 100 turns of the clock hand. In the meantime, before the clock hands turn for the 100th time, I'll say a few words. Someone could state now that Special Theory of Relativity, which applies only to the bodies that move at constant speed, doesn't apply to my thought experiment because the stations are accelerating. But everything that moves in space at constant speed once had to accelerate. So if the existence of Special Theory of Relativity is to have a reasonable justification, then it must apply to the bodies that are moving at constant speed at the time, not to those that never accelerated. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that with regard to my thought experiment, in which the stations will later move at constant speed, such a statement would be false. One more small note, I have included in my video some false statements regarding Special Theory of Relativity, such as the one I just gave, because there are many idiots and liars who spread such false statements. The clock hands have just turned for the 100th time. So observers are putting out the furnaces. As a result, the stations stop accelerating. Now, the stations are moving at constant and the same speed. But Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that's how it looks only from the point of view of a third observer relative to which the stations are moving at the same speed. Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that from observers A's and B's point of view, the stations are in relative motion. In other words, Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that from observer A's point of view, the station A is at rest and station B is moving, and from observer B's point of view, the station B is at rest and station A is moving. This is confirmed by the following quote. Yet one more small note, I have included in my video some quotes confirming what Special Theory of Relativity says, such as the one I just gave, because there are many idiots and liars who claim that Special Theory of Relativity says something different. And yet one more small note, in Special Theory of Relativity, the speeds sum up in a little more complicated way than simple x and x, but this is not what my thought experiment is about. Albert Einstein also says in Special Theory of Relativity that when the stations are in relative motion, there is the relative time dilation. In other words, Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that from the moment the observers have put out the furnaces and the clock hands were in such position, from observer A's point of view, the hand of clock B turns slower than the hand of clock A, and from observer B's point of view, the hand of clock A turns slower than the hand of clock B. This is confirmed by the following quote. Now, in accordance with what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity, observer A, who is seeing through the telescope the approaching station B at speed 2x, is calculating how much the hand of clock B turns slower than the hand of clock A. And, in accordance with what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity, observer B, who is seeing through the telescope the approaching station A at speed 2x, is calculating how much the hand of clock A turns slower than the hand of clock B. In the meantime, before observers finish their calculations, I'll say a few words. Someone could state now that the calculations of time dilation for clocks A and B, according to Special Theory of Relativity, should be made relative to a hypothetical clock C which is in the place where the stations will meet. Only that such calculations would be consistent with Special Theory of Relativity if they were made only by a third observer in the meeting place. Because, according to Special Theory of Relativity, only from the point of view of observer in the meeting place, the stations are moving relative to the meeting place. When the calculations are done by observers A and B, then in order for these calculations to be in accordance with Special Theory of Relativity, they must be done in the way that observers A and B do them. Because, according to Special Theory of Relativity, from observers A's and B's point of view, the stations are moving relative to each other. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that with regard to observers A and B such a statement would be false. Observers just finished making calculations. Now, the stations are very close to each other, so soon the braking will start. In the meantime, before the braking will start, I'll say a few words. Each observer was throwing coal into the station furnace. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that each observer should press on the brake pedal. But since Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that for observer A the station A is at rest, why the hell should observer A ever press on the brake pedal? Guided by what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity, observer A would of course not press on the brake pedal. He would think that observer B will press on the brake pedal, because he would think that only station B is moving. And since Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity that for observer B the station B is at rest, why the hell should observer B ever press on the brake pedal? Guided by what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity, observer B would of course not press on the brake pedal. He would think that observer A will press on the brake pedal, because he would think that only station A is moving. So if observers were guided by what Albert Einstein says in Special Theory of Relativity, then their journey would end up like this. Observers have not yet started to press on the brake pedal, so I'll say a few more words. The relativity of movement is a dogma on which modern physics has been built. But from the idea of relativity of movement results this breaking absurdity that I just presented. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that the modern physics is absurd. At last, observers are pressing on the brake pedal. In the meantime, before the stations stop and merge, I'll say a few words. Someone could state now that special theory of relativity, which applies only to the bodies that are moving at constant speed, doesn't apply to my thought experiment because the stations are decelerating. But everything that moves in space at constant speed will decelerate someday. So if the existence of special theory of relativity is to have a reasonable justification, then it must apply to the bodies that are moving at constant speed at the time, not to those that will never decelerate. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that with regard to my thought experiment, in which the stations once moved at constant speed, such a statement would be false. The space stations have just merged. Now, observers are putting their clocks on a table. And now, observers are looking at the clocks. But before it turns out what they see, I'll say a few words. One of paradoxes resulting from special theory of relativity is so-called the twins paradox. The point is that, according to special theory of relativity, from point of view of twin on Earth, the rocket is in motion, however, from twin cosmonauts' point of view, Earth is in motion. So, from point of view of twin on Earth, twin cosmonauts should age slower, however, from twin cosmonauts' point of view, twin on Earth should age slower. How do professors of relativistic physics solve this paradox? Well, professors of relativistic physics claim that twin cosmonaut will be younger after the rocket's return to Earth because twin cosmonaut, who was accelerated when the rocket took off, and twin on Earth, who wasn't accelerated, are not on an equal footing. This is confirmed by the following quote. But clock A and clock B were constantly on equal footing. In addition, observers applied the simple time dilation formula after the stations no longer accelerated. So, even for Beatrice it's obvious that with regard to my thought experiment such a claim would be ridiculous. So what do observers see when looking at their clocks? It doesn't really matter. What matters is what follows from special theory of relativity. And it follows that the hand of clock B must show delay relative to the hand of clock A calculated by observer A, and the hand of clock A must show delay relative to the hand of clock B calculated by observer B. This is the end of my thought experiment. But I'll say yet a few words. Someone could state now that accelerating or decelerating of space stations has somehow caused the clocks to show something different from what follows from special theory of relativity. But such a statement would be synonymous with the statement that special theory of relativity applies only to the space stations that never accelerated and will never decelerate. So, even for Beatrice, it's obvious that such a statement would be idiotic. Relativity is central to modern physics along with cosmology. This is confirmed by the following quote. But the result of my thought experiment proves that textbooks of relativistic physics are of toilet value only. Thus, it proves that the model of the universe, which professors of relativistic physics created based on theory of relativity, and which they practice at all contemporary universities, is as true as Ptolemy's geocentric model, which medieval professors practiced at all medieval universities, was true. If you want to learn what the universe really is and how it really works, then read the Owen's Unearthly Tales, which I posted on my website kzuk.online. And Beatrice will just say goodbye. Don't forget to watch my other videos on my channel. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have something to say, write a comment. And if you don't want to miss my next videos, subscribe to my channel. The next video will have the title Erroneous Concept in Modern Mathematics.